Hey everyone, welcome back. I'm Michael, and this is part 2 to the other hour-long video that I put out today. I'll link part 1 of this story in the description as well as in the top right, so make sure to watch that video first for this one to make sense. This next update was made just 2 days after the last update in the previous video. This update has taken longer to get around to than I originally intended. A lot of things have happened over the last couple of days that have kept me pretty busy, and it really wasn't until today when I had some free time after lunch that I could sit down and get this out. I'll try to get through as much as I can. Before that, however, I just want to mention a couple of things in response to comments from the last post. I'll try to be brief. Firstly, I don't know much about what's going on with Marty and his divorce. Other than to my knowledge, he's still divorcing her. Obviously, no papers or anything, but the intention is clear. In addition to that, I'm not really in the position to be advocating for any course of action that Marty should take, offering him legal advice, assisting him in doing anything to the other man, tracking down the other man's wife, etc. Marty is a grown-ass man and he can do whatever he wants with the situation, and my position as his friend is just to support him and offer advice, if he asks for it. Secondly, this isn't some sort of guerrilla marketing for an OnlyFans girl. If it was, I should have done it on the first post, which hit the front page of Reddit and was seen by over 3 million people. Also, given that this post got so popular on Reddit, it's not really a surprise that bimbo wife Mandy, another Redditor, happened to be following the story and saw her name. It could have easily been any other of the hundreds and hundreds, maybe even thousands of girls who use Reddit to post their pictures. And as a brief aside, speaking of Mandy, I have indeed talked to her. She was actually quite helpful in confirming something for me, and as a person, she seems quite nice. But guys, there are no romance plans here in the future. Mandy is married, evidently quite happily so, and for almost 2 decades, and frankly, while her husband must be cool with it, she's way too much for a mere insurance guy like me to handle. Seriously. So with that all out of the way, on to the update. The last time I wrote in, I ended up assuming that my brother had used my office computer to chat with Mandy, but it was too late for me to contact him. I am one of those guys who, once a problem is put in front of him, must be actively working on trying to solve it. This is great for my career choice, but in situations like this, all I was doing was driving myself insane. So I decided to take a deep breath, leave everything until later, and carry on with what I needed to do. First thing up was attempting to contact every person from my side that I had invited to the wedding that I had not yet informed about its cancellation. As you may recall, I had already informed my parents and had them contact my relatives on the day I made up my mind, but only Sarah and I had the complete guest list, so I needed to do the rest myself. Out of respect for my friends, I decided to call instead of text, but this might have been a bad idea since every phone call typically resulted in a rather lengthy explanation of why I was canceling the wedding. I know I could have given some other excuse, but I wanted people to know that I wasn't being frivolous or just experiencing something inane like cold feet. It was important, not just for my own reputation, but I think in order to show respect to the people who had agreed to come on that day to support myself and Sarah as a couple. Because of this, it wasn't until late into the evening that I finally managed to contact everyone, which meant it was now morning time in Australia. I knew what I needed to do, but I wanted to make sure that my ducks were all in a row, so I took a breather and made a sandwich in the kitchen. I noticed that Sarah wasn't home. I had no idea when she left and sat down to eat and think about what to do with my brother's situation. Let's call my brother Carl for the sake of shortness here. Now, Carl and I have always been pretty close despite him being 13 years older than me. He was this sort of quasi-parental figure in my life because by the time I became capable of having long-term memories, he was already well on his way to becoming an adult. He was always generous with his time, played with his little brother when other teenagers would probably have avoided such an activity like the plague, and generally seemed very mature and wise to me growing up. Suffice it to say, I respected him greatly. The idea that he had been sexting with a girl who wasn't his wife in my house was something that I was still coming to grips with, and I needed to decide what to do. Talking to him about it was obvious, but at this point, given how much of a shambles my relationship with Sarah was, I didn't know if I cared about having him confess just for the sake of clearing my name. Was there anything to salvage anyway? I needed to, for my own sake of propriety, at least yell at him about this and convince him to stop. However, I wasn't sure if I was going to rat him out or not to my SIL. Let's call her Karen, alright? Carl and Karen it is. It all depended on what he told me and whether I believed him or not. I finished my meal and logged into Facebook and video called Carl. Now, Carl works mostly from home as a remote office worker since his field is related to IT, and he's almost always available during the day, and today was no exception. It didn't even ring more than once or twice before he answered. We greeted each other, exchanged some pleasantries, and then I just sort of dove into it and asked him if he had been using my computer to chat women on the internet when he was visiting me. Carl's face froze and he leaned over out of the frame of the camera. He was obviously closing his office door. "Yeah, I did. Why?" he said to me. I swore under my breath and explained to Carl how Sarah had thought that his flirting was me since he used my computer. I explained that I wasn't happy to take the hit for him, and I asked him point blank if Karen knew about this. He waffled for a few seconds, stumbling over his words, and then looked a bit sheepish and said that no, Karen didn't know, and he'd prefer if it were kept that way. He went on to explain that their relationship had been pretty rough since their youngest was born 4 years ago, mainly in the bedroom department. Carl had always been a pretty private person, especially when it came to intimate details, or at least he had always been that way when talking to his much younger baby brother. However, this time he just let it all lay out. Things had been bad. He had been tired of getting rejected, and Karen was always tired no matter what he did or how much he helped out around the house. Eventually, this led to problems on his side, some sort of performance anxiety on the few occasions where Karen would actually feel up for some bedroom fun, and things just got worse from there. Basically, he said, "There's no amount of socks picked up, laundry folded, dishes washed, or time spent minding children that would get me laid. It was just not happening, so I started to spend time in my office at night working." He even did the finger quotes when saying this. Evidently, his working at night turned into a pretty hardcore addiction to OnlyFans sites, which, given the relative privacy he had in his office for legitimate work, spiraled out of control pretty quickly. I asked him if he was still doing it, and he swore up and down that he wasn't. I thought I believed him when he said it. He seemed to be sincere, but I just had this niggling feeling in the back of my skull that something was off. Maybe it was because of all of the deceit I had encountered recently, but I doubted my own brother, who has really been a stand-up guy to me our entire lives together. I really hated being in this situation. Now, the problem I faced was pretty complex here. First, if I wanted to clear my name, then I would have to get my brother to tell Sarah that it was him all along. However, if he did that, then there was no guarantee that Sarah wouldn't spitefully inform Karen. I personally thought it would be best if Karen knew, but at the same time, I didn't know if I felt comfortable potentially dropping a nuke on my brother's marriage over something he not only said he stopped, but is in this sort of a moral gray area for me. I didn't have an answer right away as to what to do, but I did urge him to tell his wife about this and to get into marriage counseling. He said that they actually had been going for the last 6 months, and while it was helpful, what had really helped him was getting a prescription for some generic Viagra. I actually did a spit take at that, neatly spraying my computer screen with water. He told me that they had been trying to make sure they have intimate time at least a couple of times a week, and the Viagra had cured him of his performance anxiety to the point where now they were both looking forward to spending time together after the kids went to bed. The general gist of this was something along the lines of, "Hey, this is actually going in the right direction now, please don't screw this up for us." I really didn't want to be in this position, not just for the sake of Carl and Karen, but for my 2 nieces as well. And if what Carl was telling me was the truth, I could be tossing a firebomb into a relationship that was starting to mend. It was unpredictable what would happen, so yeah, it may disappoint some people, but at the time I felt that the best option I had was to wait and see. I was, after all, going to meet him in a couple of weeks in the flesh, and once I got him alone in a room and a few drinks into him, I was going to definitely get to the bottom of this. It seemed like the best course of action. Anyway, that night I went to bed early. I didn't see Sarah until the next morning. She looked haggard, as if she had a distinct lack of sleep. I asked her where she had been, mostly out of habit. After all, we had been together for almost 6 years. She told me that she had gone down to the courthouse for Evelyn's arraignment to post bail. The courts here close at 1 p.m. on the weekends, which is why she had disappeared soon after I went into my office, and that afterward, she had driven her to her parents' house and spent the night. She made a point of telling me how horrible it was to have to explain to her parents that I had called off the wedding. I asked her if her parents knew the reason why, and she barked, "Of course they do." I tried to remain calm, but by this point in this ordeal, I was losing it. I bit back at her. "Are you going to move back there so that they have both girls at home now?" It was childish and petty, but the fact that she bailed Evelyn out of jail annoyed me to no end. "You don't need to be an ass about this." She said, to which I said, and you don't need to be Evelyn's fucking underling. I could see Sarah visibly flinch when I said that to her. It obviously had struck a chord, and the corners of her eyes started to tear up, and I cooled my temper. We just sort of stood there miles apart in the living room of our house and didn't say anything for a good solid minute or two until Sarah decided to continue talking. Our parents are going to be here at 3. I actually facepalmed at this. I was about to go off on her for not consulting me on this, but I decided that was just my own ego. After all, I did need to sit down with them and work out the details around the wedding and whatever remaining deposit we had, and I needed to, at least once, face-to-face explain to everyone why it wasn't happening. So fine, let's do this and get it out of the way. I tried to make myself busy, but there isn't much you can do on a Sunday except waste time, and time wasting isn't very enjoyable when you know you are heading into the meat grinder in just a few hours. Still, 3 p.m. came, and so did our parents. We all sat down at the large kitchen table that Sarah had bought just a month after we closed on the house. It was secondhand from the Facebook Marketplace, but she loved it because it was solid oak with a beautiful finish and capable of seating 8. She always wanted to have big dinner parties with our families over, just not like this. The next 3 hours were grueling. No one was happy, nor should they be, I guess. The best support I could get came unsurprisingly from my own parents, but even that was tempered. Essentially along the lines of, well, it's his decision to make, which more or less means, yeah, we think this is crazy too, but we're still backing him. Honestly, that was fine with me. I didn't need my parents to get the stigma by association of canceling the wedding. I was fine with owning that. Eventually, we worked out a decent deal regarding the wedding. We would try to get back whatever money we could, split it back however it was contributed. Some things like the honeymoon were all paid for by me, or the flowers were all paid for by Sarah's parents. Then eat whatever losses there were communally. However, when it came to the subject of the house, Sarah vehemently objected to my idea of paying back her or her parents for the deposit. Basically, she didn't intend to move. Now, as you might imagine, Sarah and I hadn't really talked about the us living together situation in too much detail. The fact that I even brought up settling the house equity seemed to shock her because the implication here is that I expect her to move out of our home. She threw a fit and I don't blame her. I should have settled our relationship status with her first before trying to negotiate a payment plan with her parents. It really tipped my hand to everyone about how I was feeling about our relationship. And while I think our parents expected it, or at least understood, Sarah was beside herself. She was absolutely not accepting of us breaking up over this, and she made it clear. I am not moving out of my house and we are not breaking up, she declared, and that's pretty much how my Sunday night ended. After our parents left, Sarah and I tried to talk it out some more, but we kept running in circles around each other and I had to curb my natural inclination to run her down until we got a resolution. Truthfully, I was pretty damn tired as well, and I just wanted to turn off my brain. Believe it or not, we just ended up sitting on the couch and watching a movie together in silence until it was time to go to sleep. We left it there with a "we'll talk about it more tomorrow" and retreated to our separate rooms. On Monday, I woke up to a large handwritten letter slid under the door from Sarah. I took a brief look at the first few pages and decided I would deal with it later and went to work. When I left, Sarah was still in bed. She must have been up late writing that letter. At the office, I rescheduled some meetings and started calling venues and vendors that were on my list. The other ones were being handled by Sarah or her parents. It was a mixed bag of results. The catering people were adamant that I pay most of their fees under the pretense that they had ordered most of the food. I shot back at them over this, like were they expecting me to eat a week-old steak? But my appeal fell on deaf ears. I tried talking to the woman who ran the catering business and explaining what happened, but that seemed to only firm up her resolve to get as much money as possible out of me. Inversely, the DJ that I had hired for the entertainment was incredibly kind and gave us back almost all of the money. It wasn't much, however. Things went on like this, and during the day, between making calls and doing work, I read Sarah's letter. Now, this is 20 pages of written word, so I'm just going to summarize. The gist of it was that ever since childhood, Sarah had been bullied by Evelyn, and in response, Sarah's way of dealing with this was to essentially go along with whatever Evelyn wanted to hear. She went on to say that it had become sort of a general way of operating in her life, that she was just afraid to rock the boat, to cause a problem, or sometimes even to voice an opinion. I reflected on this because, truthfully, when I look back at our relationship with a more critical eye, I think Sarah was a bit too perfect of a girlfriend. What I mean by that is that she never disagreed with me, never picked her plans over mine, or even really advocated too strongly against anything I wanted to do. She went out of her way to make herself appear useful and acted more or less like a yes woman in our relationship. I mean, we had never even so much as had a minor disagreement in 6 years, let alone a full-blown argument until now. It sounds great from a relationship standpoint, until of course it's not. I couldn't shake this feeling that Sarah has this deep-seated insecurity and need to make people happy. You know what they call people-pleasing behavior. When I start looking at it this way, a lot of things make sense to me, and I start to realize that despite being with Sarah for 6 years, I don't actually know her that well. It's like she's put up this image around her, which is really just a mirror, a reflection of whatever she thinks people want to see, and in the case of our relationship, she's more or less been acting my role of the perfect girlfriend, while never really letting me inside to see who she is as a person. Hell, I can't even say that what I saw in those text messages is the real Sarah, because it's almost certainly just another reflection. This time of Evelyn and all her warts and faults. This may sound weird, but it's like we are in this unequal relationship. Whereas maybe she loves me for who I am and how I wear my thoughts on my face and my heart on my sleeve. But maybe I only love her for the mirror she is holding up to my face. I don't know, if this sounds too metaphysical for you, then I'm right there as well. It's like this wisp of an idea that I'm still trying to catch by my fingertips. All I know is that in the last few days, I've probably learned more about Sarah than I had in the last 6 years, and the letter she wrote me was the first real view into her childhood that I had glimpsed. That night, we talked more about this, specifically about her childhood and her behavior. The conclusion that we came to is that she needs help. She's a grown woman who is sadly stuck acting like a child, too scared to displease anyone lest she face her sister's wrath, her parents' disapproval, or the loss of love from the ones she loves. This is no way to have a relationship, and I can say that I feel much more confident and assured that my decision to call off the wedding was the correct one. In fact, it could not be any more correct. That night after our talk, I went to bed with much less angst than I had in a few days. So this basically brings me up to our last update, and once again, it's a freaking novel. I won't wait 2 to 3 days to do another one. Otherwise, I will keep falling forever. For people who have been wondering, the entire situation with my brother is more or less resolved, and I'll get to that tomorrow, but the situation with Sarah and I are still up in the air a bit, but there is a semblance of a plan going forward. I promise I'll get to it as soon as I can, but as you can imagine, there is a lot to write, and I can only do what I can do. Then, about 3 weeks later, we got another update from OP. Sorry this update took so long to get around to, but to be blunt, after the chaos that happened initially started to die down and my state of hypervigilance started to dwindle, I found myself sinking into a deep depressive funk that sapped most of my will to do almost anything, and recounting the shit show that is my life became really unappealing. However, the date for the wedding has now come and gone, and I'm on vacation with my siblings and my brother's family and starting to really feel like most of this is behind me. So anyway, on to the updates. First off, since this is the thing that seems to really bother people, my brother and his wife are doing fine. Like I said in my last post, I urged my brother to tell Karen about his sexting thing with the Australian OF girl known as Bimbo Wife Mandy, whom, by the way, is a very lovely person. I sort of hinted in my last update that I had gotten confirmation from Mandy to back up my brother's story, and according to her, the timelines matched up, and not only that, but his of account no longer exists. Now, she could be lying to me to protect a customer, but I don't think that's the case, and she seemed like a genuine person. My brother, for his part, did tell his wife what had happened in one of their marriage counseling sessions, and according to him, she took it pretty well and is treating it as water under the bridge. I did pull her aside last week and ask her if she was really okay with this, and she told me, "OP, we're not as squeaky clean as you think. Both of us watch and that's basically what I consider this to be. It's not like he was going to run off and have an affair with her. I asked her if she would feel the same way if he had visited a prostitute. It's legal where they live. And she said no, she wouldn't, but he didn't. So I guess that's their clear line. It's a bit different from mine and a lot of really loud people on Reddit, but if the noises I heard coming from their hotel room last night are any indication, they are doing fine and their dead bedroom situation is totally resolved. Honestly, these two are borderline taking advantage right now. Since my sister is taking the place of Sarah, they switched rooms with her and now the kids are with her. And they are both little girls and love having a sleepover with their auntie. And they have 2 babysitters who are happy to take the kids while they run off and do Lord knows what. We know what, but let's not talk about it. Overall, I think I did the right thing in giving him the space to make this right on his own, even though people hounded me for it. I will strongly argue that the situation with my brother and the situation with Evelyn were like comparing night and day. I don't agree that cybering someone you know is a professional worker is anywhere near the same ballpark as actively carrying on an affair. I don't think my actions and how I dealt with it were anything close to how Sarah did. Like I said in my previous post, she not only hid the affair from Marty, she actively engaged in disparaging conversations about him. She said several other things that I won't recount here for various reasons. Suffice it to say, I feel good about this choice on my part, and people who don't agree with me can put their heads in an oven for all I care. Next up, I think, is the wedding itself. There isn't much to say here. Sarah and I and our families lost our shirt on it, but that was expected. I forced the caterer who had ordered all that food to either give me back a bigger refund or give me the food, and she chose the latter, which is fair enough. We now have a lot of frozen steak, chicken, and fish. It was delivered to my parents' house, and I think they are passing it out to interested parties. Likewise, some wedding gifts from faraway relatives arrived and are at my house until we can send them back. But overall, the date just came and passed, and for the sake of both of our sanities, Sarah and I spent it apart. As for the issue with Marty and Evelyn, I don't think this is something that is going to be settled anytime soon. Marty is absolutely divorcing Evelyn, but it's difficult for him, primarily because she's making it difficult by begging him to reconsider. On top of that, school is starting again, and so Marty will be back with this student instead of taking care of their daughter every day. I think that's really hurting him right now because spending every day with his parents and his kid was really helping him mentally. Also, despite what some people have wished for, Marty hasn't made a big stink about this at Evelyn's work, despite the fact that he probably could get them both fired since it became obvious that they were using work trips to hook up on the company's dime. Nor has he gone and told Jake's wife about the affair either, something I strongly disagree with. When I questioned him about it, all he said was that he was in no big hurry. After all, he had the text messages, the photos from the pub, and the video he took when he entered the house. Basically, he could bury this guy whenever he wants to. I think in some kind of twisted way, hippy-dippy Marty the Birkenstock-wearing teacher is enjoying making this guy sweat it out. Either that, or maybe he's enjoying making Evelyn fully realize her place in the world at this point. Just a side piece to a married man. I'm not sure, but Marty has definitely gotten a bit darker over this whole thing, not that I can blame him. Everything I know about Evelyn is secondhand from Sarah, but the way I understand it, she is largely just going to work and coming straight back to her parents' house every day, like a teenager on curfew. I don't think they are pleased with either of their daughters right now, but oddly enough, even though the implosion of Sarah and mine's wedding was extremely public, I think that it's being drowned out by the constant drama that is Evelyn's impending divorce. Sarah said it almost seemed like they forgot about her once they realized that Marty was seriously taking steps to divorce Evelyn and their concern about having access to their granddaughter. I sort of get that they are very doting grandparents, and I'm sure their anger at Evelyn is compounded by the fact that their access to their grandchild is going to be essentially cut in half. Now on to the big event, Sarah and I. First off, I don't think that this update is likely to make anyone happy, not the people who urged me to yeet her out of my life, nor the people who demand that I treat her with sympathy and compassion for her obviously screwed up mental issues. The facts are that aside from the lying and hiding the affair, what shook me the most was probably the way that she carried on with her sister in those text messages. Maybe people would understand me better if I shared them, but I simply refuse to repeat it, and I don't want to get into arguments over their content. Suffice it to say, it was enough for me to reconsider Sarah's complete character, which is largely where I am at today. still considering it. That's not to say that we are still together, definitely not in the way we were an engaged couple, but we haven't completely closed the door on the relationship either. I've come to understand a bit more about what kind of person Sarah is and which parts of her are genuine and which parts are facsimile constructed in order for her to ingratiate herself to people, her sister included. Basically, it helps to be able to put a name to what is going on with her, this people-pleasing behavior. It helps more to understand how it started. Her family, with copious examples retold to me, further helps that she is actively seeking help for it. On top of that, even though I found her behavior extremely gross and inappropriate, I gave her a lot of credit for how she dealt with the situation when I came home that night to find her and Evelyn on our couch. She didn't lie, she didn't minimize, and she largely took accountability for what she did. Remember, at the time, she didn't know that I had seen her text messages with Evelyn, and she definitely could have tried to omit her participation or minimize it in some way, but she didn't. She was truthful to me even when she knew it would make her look bad. That actually counts for a lot in my book, which is why I am looking at simply changing the chapter instead of closing it. To be clear, this isn't a victory for the forgive her and blame everything on the sister crowd because, frankly, I haven't forgiven her, and our situation is very different now. She has moved back into her old room at her parents' house, much like Evelyn, although Sarah will probably be out of there in a couple of weeks because she says the environment is not good for her mental health or getting help with her issues. And I am paying back her equity in the house in fortnightly installments out of my pay until we are all caught up, which will help her defray the costs of getting an apartment on her own. We are definitely not together right now. Sarah really did not want to accept this at first, and I can see her point of view, even be sympathetic to it, but also, if she really has these emotional problems that it appears she does, then I felt that pushing the issue could be the way to light a fire under her pants to get her to finally seek some real help for them, and just forgiving her would be tantamount to sweeping everything under the rug, which in the long run would spell disaster for our relationship. I really wish that she had opened up to me earlier before all of this hit the fan because I'd much rather handle the problem as a loving partner and support her more closely. But she didn't really give me the opportunity to do that, which is a shame, so this is the best I can do at this point. So basically my situation is more or less just wait and see on the Sarah front. Maybe one or both of us will get tired of this and completely throw in the towel and move on completely. It could almost certainly be me, but frankly, I have no desire to further complicate my life by being intimate with any other woman right now, so I think, if anything, we're looking at a period of months down the line here until we get a firm resolution one way or another on this front, and I'm frankly fine with that. Not everything needs to progress at a hyper-emotional breakneck pace, and if I look at my situation, I'm fine financially, we're separated, we're not living together, and I'm cautiously cynical about the entire situation. I'm also not kidding myself. If at any point I think that Sarah's issues are too big of a deal or that I can't see us rebuilding trust with each other, then I will dip. I have no interest in prolonging a situation that I see as hopeless, which I guess says it all. I don't think it's hopeless, I just think it's going to be difficult, and I'm open to waiting a bit to see how it plays out, to the point even where I am seeking my own counselor to help me process the events of the last few weeks, as well as looking into how Sarah and I interacted with each other, because I do actually believe that while I might have been fooled by her, it was partially a willing deception on my part, because who wouldn't love a girlfriend who never disagrees with them, always wants to do what they do, and goes out of her way to make sure you're happy before she is. The thing I am struggling with, and maybe Sarah as well, is how much of that is genuine love she has for me and how much of it is just a deeply ingrained need to please other people born out of her fear of rejection and anxiety. I guess, barring throwing in the towel, when we reach the bottom of that question, we'll know the answer to Sarah and mine's relationship. I know it's not the update that everyone wanted, but it's all I got. Maybe check this space in a few months and see how it played out. Once again, thanks to everyone who sent me supportive messages, and a pox on the rest of you. The next update occurred about 3 months later. It was almost 2 months ago when I made my original post about my former fiance reaching out to me asking for help in regards to an issue in her family. I think some people had some decent advice in that thread, and it really helped me clarify my own thoughts on the matter. Basically, my distrust in the sincerity of Sarah's intentions was probably overblown on my part, as well as immaterial to what I really should be doing as a friend to both her and Marty. In regards to Sarah, I think that it was very apparent to me that her relationship with me wasn't as important of a motivator in her actions as I was selfishly assuming. She had, and still has, a huge beef with her sister and feels incredibly horrible about not just her part in Marty's current situation, but how the upheaval has affected her 3-year-old niece. Add on to that a lifetime of family resentment, and I think she was keen to do anything to screw over Evelyn, who wouldn't be. Her reaching out to me was more or less because out of all the people she knows, I would be the one most likely to help and offer good advice. I'll admit to being overly cynical of her trying to use the situation to appear like she was making amends to people and working on her issues, but upon reflection, I realized that not everything in her life revolved around me or our relationship. Basically, I need to chill on being distrustful of people when they are finally doing what I would be liking them to do. Lesson learned for anyone who has felt betrayed. You can rob yourself of positive emotions by living in the past and not the present. As for Marty, given that Sarah had given me the heads up about her sister and parents' plot to try and file a false report accusing him of child abuse, I was 100% dead set on informing him as soon as I could, regardless of Sarah's desire to be more subtle. That being said, I did make one last-ditch effort to get Sarah to be the one to reach out and do this, as I thought it might help her mend her relationship with her soon-to-be former brother-in-law and help the process of making amends to both him and her niece. As I guessed, her hesitancy, as well as why she wanted my help, was because her parents were more or less fully on board with this plan and she wasn't quite emotionally strong enough to deal with any potential fallout from them, particularly since she had spent her entire life being bullied by her family, and to make matters worse, she was at their mercy since she was living with them. We discussed it, and I gave her a promise that if this came back to her, that I would get her a place to live if she needed it. She asked me if I would go with her when she faced Marty, and I almost said yes out of habit, but I declined. I told her that I thought it would be better for everyone if she faced this one alone, and she reluctantly agreed. Obviously, I wasn't there when Sarah and Marty met, but I do know it took place at his parents' house. His parents obviously knew about Sarah's role in covering up for Evelyn's infidelity, and there were some choice words pointed at her. Fair enough, Sarah told Marty about the plot, and then they called Marty's lawyer and she gave a statement. For all the drama preceding it, the meeting was over as quickly as that. One thing that Sarah said, however, was that she was grateful that Marty had let her play with her niece. He didn't have to do that, but it meant a lot to her. I could literally hear the sorrow in her voice, to the point where I had a fleeting thought that maybe Sarah was carrying too much of a burden on her shoulders for what ultimately was Evelyn's actions. To be frank, I don't know how to address this or if I should. I'll try to finish this up quickly since there is a word limit. Several weeks passed. My offer of a place to stay wasn't needed. Sarah managed to get her own apartment not too long after we spoke, although I did speed up the money I was paying her back by a couple of weeks to help facilitate this. Anyway, shortly after she moves out, Evelyn finally makes her move. I don't want to get into exactly what she accused Marty of, but it was pretty vile, as in something that could get you killed in prison if it was true. Frankly, I was shocked when I heard it because as despicable as Evelyn is, I never thought she was that horrid, nor did her parents, who seemingly went along with this. As you can imagine, there was an emergency child custody hearing in front of a judge that night, and as they were discussing the charges, Marty's lawyer pulled out a dated and notarized affidavit from Sarah detailing the plot as well as a recorded interview on a USB stick. Now, I would love to say that Evelyn ended up in jail or driven out of town or got her just desserts in some other way, but in truth, we don't know yet. She has some charges against her from this stunt, and I'm not privy to what they are. But in all likelihood, I don't have much hope that she'll get more than a slap on the wrist, since otherwise our prisons would be filled with acrimonious divorcees. That being said, the custody hearing did not go Evelyn's way, and now there is a court order in place granting Marty primary custody, and Evelyn must have a court-ordered observer with her when she visits their kid. This order will be in place until the divorce is finalized, which might be coming up soon because I think getting caught out so badly has taken a lot of the wind out of Evelyn's sails to make this divorce difficult. Marty says that her lawyer has been in contact to discuss a settlement, which is a positive sign. and that's pretty much where we are today. As you can imagine, Sarah is pretty much persona non grata with her family right now, and that's not likely to change even though it is the holidays. She accepted that this would likely be the fact if she went ahead and gave a statement, so she says she was prepared for it, but I can tell that even though her family has largely treated her like dog shit for most of her life, it still pains her to have contact cut like this. She jokes to me that it's helping me get past my issues with them, but I can tell it still hurts. A lot of people who know about my backstory here will probably be pissed about this, but I rather impulsively offered for Sarah to help me spend my parents' airline miles and travel with me to Australia to visit my brother and his family. I honestly didn't think she would accept it because she's a teacher, and they're not quite on break yet, but she surprised me. My brother has a very large property in semi-rural Queensland with a few bungalows on it. We cleaned out the snakes yesterday, and Sarah and I are neighbors who are looking forward to doing some surfing on Christmas Day. Our relationship is still very much, it's complicated, hence the separate accommodations, but I have to admit that I am feeling better about things in general. My biggest issue with Sarah and why I canceled our wedding was that I didn't understand how she could act as she did with her sister. Now, knowing the backstory here between the two, and furthermore, seeing her literally torch that relationship with the fury of 1,000 suns, it's hard for me to still be seriously worried about Evelyn's influence on her. It'd require a degree of paranoia that not only I don't possess, but one that would probably qualify as a mental illness. Still, we're both taking it slow. To be frank, we're in this sort of weird, exclusive platonic relationship. It obviously can't last, and while Sarah has made it pretty clear how she would like to resolve the situation, I'm a bit cagey. It's not like I don't love her. That hasn't really been an issue. I can't even say that it's not that I don't trust her, since most of the reasons why I felt that way have been excised like a tumor. It's just that I am unsure about the trajectory of our relationship. I'm not hankering to rush back to the altar anytime soon. And I think most of my friends would disown me if I did, given I just canceled a wedding at the last moment a few months ago. Sarah knows this and she's been largely accepting of it, but even if she tells me that she doesn't care about getting married, I can't help but feel like she secretly does. I guess the best way for me to explain my thinking is that the relationship we had, which had put us on the path to marriage, is done and gone. Maybe we will make another one that will head in that same direction someday, but I'm no longer sure that this is something I want, and it's not just Sarah, it's with anyone. I guess all of the marital problems I've seen this last half year have left a bad taste in my mouth. In any case, whatever future we have together will have to accommodate these feelings, and I want to be certain that I'm not wasting her time or leading her on. I guess time will tell. Anyway, thanks to the 5 people who are still invested in my crappy life story. If something else interesting or exciting happens, I'll probably post it on my profile. It's been a wild ride, but all of the support I've gotten from the broader Reddit community has been awesome. Thanks again. Edit. I just found out something today from Sarah that I didn't know, but I feel is pretty relevant to the discussion. Basically, Marty's lawyer presented a lot more evidence than just Sarah's testimony. They had also had his kid screened and examined by 2 different psychologists within the week that they had first found out about the impending accusations. During this process, some stuff came out. Basically, their daughter caught Evelyn and AP in flagrante delicto at their home multiple times. Her mom was giving her ice cream to not say anything. Marty's lawyer read some from a transcript of one of the psychologist interviews, and I will just say that the phrase big wee wee came up. This poor kid, no one deserves a mother like that. Now, the fact that she only gets court-supervised visitation makes a lot of sense. Sarah says that it sounds like she just saw them doing it a couple of times, not that he did anything to her. Needless to say, I think Evelyn is in the royal right now. I'm surprised her parents haven't booted her ass from their home. The most recent update was made in June of this year, so about 6 months from the previous one. Hi everyone, it's been a while since I've logged into Reddit on this account, only to see a couple hundred messages begging me for an update, so I figured I would at least sort out a few things that are commonly being asked. First off, Marty and Evelyn are divorced. It took a bit over half a year for it to be finalized, but despite Evelyn's hijinks and stalling, that seems to be typical of where we live. The only real notable thing about the divorce itself is that Marty was granted primary physical custody of their daughter, which was seen as a bit of a coup considering how these things typically go. But to be fair, Evelyn mostly did that to herself. Marty's lawyer was able to make a huge stink about her false charges in the court, as well as the psychologist's reports, and that was combined with the fact that Marty already had custody. The judge seemed to think that it was appropriate to basically just leave things how they were. It's true what they say, guys. Possession is 9/10 of the law. Keep that in mind if you ever get divorced yourselves. The financial fallout didn't seem to be that big of a deal. The house was sold and Marty got a slightly bigger share of it than Evelyn did in lieu of maintenance alimony, and that was that. I actually had dinner with Marty at a little bar and grill close to where I work one night, and he thanked me again for my help. He also had a lot of nice things to say about Sarah, which I appreciated. She's really been coming through as an aunt for his little girl and spending time with her pretty frequently. I didn't point out to him that this is because there's no way she'd get to see her when it was Evelyn's weekend, as the sisters are still not talking, but I'm sure he can figure it out on his own. One interesting thing that came out of that dinner is that Marty told me that Evelyn wrote him a big letter during the proceedings, begging him for another chance. And in this letter, she confessed a lot of things that even Sarah was unaware of. Turns out this wasn't Evelyn's first adultery rodeo. She had cheated on Marty when they were dating and again shortly after they got married. Marty and I were both stymied by that. Why would you marry someone you were cheating on? Like, no offense to Marty here, but he's not rich, and he's not some super stud, just a slightly quirky, normal-looking high school teacher. If Evelyn didn't like that, then she certainly didn't need to marry him. Anyway, it blew my mind. Anyway, she went on to say that she was seeing a therapist and working on herself and all the usual stuff, but neither Marty nor I felt like therapy would help her very much. I mean, it was clear to me that Evelyn's cheating wasn't because of some undiagnosed childhood trauma or self-esteem issues. Given what she tried to pull in court, it's way more likely that she has a morality problem, and I don't think therapy can fundamentally change the nature of someone that drastically. I shared with Marty some of the insights I had gotten from my conversations with Sarah about her relationship and childhood with Evelyn, and we both came to the conclusion that fundamentally, Evelyn is just a user. She will basically do whatever she wants, use anyone however she wants, and she will never consider how it impacts other people because she feels she can just manipulate everyone into getting off her back. Suffice it to say, Evelyn's letter didn't have much of an impact on Marty, or rather, it only firmed up his already solid resolve to divorce her. Marty said that he felt that she was so dishonest and manipulative that even her mea culpa confessions had an air of manipulation about them. I tend to agree. I think it was a last-ditch effort to try to appear truthful to him. Too little, too late. Secondly, during this dinner, Marty also told me that he had finally contacted the wife of Jake, the affair partner, a couple of weeks ago. I asked him why he waited so long, and he said he just wanted to make sure that it didn't impact his divorce with Evelyn in some sort of way. I didn't like that answer, but I could at least understand it. He said that she was a nice lady who was apparently incredibly shocked when he presented her with the evidence of what Jake and Evelyn had been up to. Remember, Marty had a video of them in his house. It seems that Mrs. Jake had absolutely no clue that anything was going on. She was too busy dealing with their small child. I think 1 or 2 years old. Marty felt pretty bad about the whole thing, but he said that if the situation was reversed, he would have wanted to know. I could only nod in agreement with him there. It seems like a difficult but necessary thing for him to do. There's no update on if that couple is getting divorced or not, but Marty said he had the impression that she was going to try and salvage something due to their small child. I did ask him if he was interested in getting back at the guy, but Marty just waved me off. He said that anything he did to him would probably just make it harder for his wife and kid, and he'd rather just get on with his life. I can understand that, but I think Marty is a better guy than I am, because if I was in his shoes, I would have really put the screws on the guy. Well, I guess Jake has enough of his own problems right now anyway. Lastly, I know people really want an update about me and Sarah, so here it is. We had a good trip in Queensland. The weather was hot, but evidently pretty mild this last Christmas. There were lots of beach days and lots of spending time with my nieces. Sarah is an elementary school teacher and she's fantastic with kids. All in all, it was a great time. I think Sarah and I both found it really helpful to be away from home for a couple of weeks. Being together in a different setting really helped us focus on the here and now and not so much on the wild wild trip we'd both been on. By the time we left to come back to the States, we were both in a very relaxed state of mind, and a lot of problems that we had that seemed very difficult to get past started to feel a lot smaller. That's not to say that there aren't still sore spots for both of us. Predictably, my newfound desire never to get married has not been easy for Sarah to adjust to, and to be frank, the better our relationship got, the more this became an issue. I had to explain to her that it wasn't really about us or just about us. It was more about witnessing a bunch of bullshit in a short period of time by a lot of different people that turned me off to it in general. The cheating, physical and emotional, the lies, the pain, all of that. It just seems way too heavy for me right now to contemplate. She stewed on that for a few days, and then one night while we were washing up from dinner, she asked me if I still intended to have children someday or not. It was a fair question and one that I hadn't really been asking myself. You see, one of the things I'd been looking forward to was starting a family with Sarah. I mean this sincerely. She would be an amazing mom. She works with kids every day, so you would think it would put her off, but rather you can tell that it's basically her calling. Just the way she is with my nieces is freaking adorable. Anyway, I realized that while I may have emotionally given up on marriage, I hadn't given up on having a family. I know that sounds odd, but you can tell that I hadn't thought this through all the way. Sarah's question basically made me think much longer term than I had been willing to do previously, and I struggled to come up with a good answer at the time. I was pretty open to Sarah about what I was feeling at the time, and she seemed like she understood. She said, "I want a family too, but if you don't want one, I'd still want to be with you." It was nice to hear, but I'm not so sure that I would be happy if that's the case. Like I said, Sarah would be an amazing mom, and it feels like bullshit on my part if being with me denies her that opportunity. We went back and forth on this a little bit, with me trying to convince her she was giving up too much and her holding fast to what she said and not backing down. We basically ended the discussion with an agreement on both sides to think about it more and come back and talk about it later. So that's what I did. I know some people don't want to have kids, but deep down inside, I knew that I did. More than that, I wanted a family. Something approximating the family I grew up in as a kid. To me, that means a mother and father, together with their children, are all in the same house. At this point, the point of being married or not becomes essentially moot, because if you split, there's still child support and custody, and you'll likely be a de facto spouse anyway, so splitting communal property and all that jazz. It's like the old saying, 6 of one, half a dozen of another. You can call it whatever you want, but effectively, it's a marriage. Once I had accepted that, I asked myself if I would get into this kind of child-rearing, common law marriage type situation with any other woman than Sarah. Like, would it be easier for me to commit to that if it was a different woman? The more I thought about it, the less I felt that this was true. I love Sarah. That had never been in doubt. My trust in her had been damaged pretty seriously, but if we had more time and hadn't had a wedding looming over our heads, we might have been able to make it work. I felt pretty strongly that the time constraint had played a bit of a part in me pulling the pin on the impending nuptials. Now, before anyone gets their hopes up, Sarah and I didn't rush out and get married. We did, however, sit down again and have a more serious talk about our future, one that was, frankly, way overdue. I acknowledged that I still wanted to have a family in the future, and she said that if we did have a child together, she would prefer to be married or at least cohabitating. I pointed out to her that these were basically the same thing in our state, at least after a couple of years. She said she knew, and then that's when she surprised me with something. She went to her purse, retrieved an envelope, and handed it to me. I was expecting it to be another letter, but it was not. Instead, it was a prenuptial agreement. I asked her when she had this drawn up, and she said shortly after we separated. She had intended to plead her case with it at the time, but thought better of it once she came to understand my position on where things had landed in our relationship. "I felt like I needed to listen to what you were telling me instead of trying to change your mind," she said. That was a bit eye-opening to me because I thought, evidently incorrectly, that she was much more resentful about the marriage being called off. She said she was more hurt than resentful, and if she was angry, it was at herself for being stupid. Still, she had held onto the agreement, probably because she was hoping that if the opportunity ever came up, it might prove how serious she was taking what she had done. I asked her, "If I had asked you to marry me, would you have shown this to me?" And she said, "Absolutely, I need you to have complete trust in me. I don't want to let you or me down again." I am pretty good at reading people, and this felt like as honest a statement as I have ever heard from someone. I read the agreement, and yes, I checked the date on her signature. Her story checked out. It seemed pretty sensible sensible to me, and there was even an infidelity clause in it where it was spelled out exactly what was considered infidelity. It was pretty eye-opening to me. Sarah evidently considers a lot of behavior that I might have given a pass on much more seriously. I mentioned that to her and she said we could revise it later after a good discussion, but the main points were pretty solid. I agreed with her. Anyway, we put the agreement aside for now and talked a little bit more about where we go from here. Short and long of it, I asked her to move back in with me. I think she was stunned by this because she immediately broke down crying. Sarah is a messy crier, even when she's happy crying, and my t-shirt suffered for it. She still has a few months left on her lease, so she's going to ride it out until that's over, and then we'll move her back into the house. She said that when she moves in, she should sign some sort of rental agreement with me. I told her I thought that was a bit over the top and months away, so let's just park that thought for now. I won't say that it felt like we closed one chapter and started another because it's not quite like that. We've been going through a long process of sorting out our feelings, talking to each other, and on my part, really observing her actions. In fact, one of the things that was kind of a downer at the time is that Sarah said to me, "This is the best thing that's happened to me in a long time, and I have like almost no one I can talk to about it." You see, it's not just Evelyn that she's not talking to, but she's still not talking to her parents. Her father has made some overtures to stay in contact, but she and her mother are basically treating each other like they died. I have some pretty complicated feelings about this. On the one hand, I think her family has been a big problem for her, and even if she's been working through it with a therapist, neither of us think she is prepared to deal with them yet. But on the other hand, I do wish that things didn't have to be like this for her. After all, my family and hers seem like almost complete opposites, and I guess I just wish she had been born into a family like mine instead. There are a lot of really good parts of family life, and having good siblings and parents that Sarah has never really experienced, and this makes me sad for her. Hell, it makes her sad for her as well. But if there's a bright spot, it's that my family never stopped caring about her. Even my parents, I think, have been silently rooting for us to figure things out. So that's where we are at today. We're still working through things at what probably feels like a glacial pace for readers here on Reddit, but that's just how life works sometimes. Overall, I would have to say that despite appearances, our relationship is much stronger now than it was before I called off the marriage. We both have a much deeper understanding of each other, and frankly, Sarah has really demonstrated a lot of emotional growth in the last year. Jesus, it's been a year, an entire year. It's surreal to me how it's flown by, but I'm glad to put most of it in the rearview mirror. Like I said, I don't think we've turned a corner. It's been way more gradual than that, but I definitely do feel like after some soul searching, we are back on the right track. P.S. For anyone who cares, I plan on finishing that pagoda this year. There's still enough time to get it done before summer is over, and I'd like to have at least a few fireside nights outside with my ex-fiancé and current girlfriend.